Cold open, midnight to 1:30. By August 1962, Marilyn Monroe was the most photographed woman in the world. Her face sold magazines. Her voice filled movie theaters. 50 million Americans knew her name. But the girl who became her had spent her childhood invisible. She had lived in 11 different homes before her 16th birthday. She had scrubbed floors in exchange for meals. She had been told, more than once, that she wasn't pretty enough to matter. So how did a girl who grew up with nothing, no family, no money, no connections, become the face of an entire era? The answer isn't what you think. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a casting couch. It was something quieter, something most people never saw. This is the story of how Marilyn Monroe happened. Not the myth, the real climb, the one that started long before anyone was watching. And it began in a place most of America tried to forget. Setup, 1:30 to 4 o'clock. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to June 1926. Los Angeles, a city doubling in size every decade. A place where people came to disappear or reinvent themselves. Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen in the charity ward of Los Angeles General Hospital. Her mother worked as a film cutter at Consolidated Film Industries. Her father's identity was never confirmed. By the time Norma Jean was 2 weeks old, her mother had placed her with a foster family. Not because she didn't care, because she couldn't afford to care. If you were born in the 1920s or 1930s, you know what the Great Depression did to families. Mothers worked 12-hour shifts. Fathers disappeared looking for work. Children were raised by neighbors, by churches, by strangers. Norma Jean moved between foster homes throughout her childhood. Some families were kind, others were not. She later described one home where she was made to sleep on the floor and wash dishes in exchange for food. But here's what most people don't know. Even in those years, she was watching, learning, studying the women in the movie magazines her foster mothers left around the house. She noticed how they posed, how they smiled, how they made people look at them. And in 1944, something happened that gave her the chance to try it herself. Rising Action, 4 to 9 o'clock. Act 1. The Factory Girl in 1944, Norma Jean was 18 years old and married to her first husband, a merchant marine. When he shipped out to the Pacific, she took a job at the radio plane company in Burbank, inspecting parachutes and spraying fuselages with fire retardant. Thousands of women were doing the same work. Rosie the Riveter wasn't a character. She was your neighbor, your sister, your mother. But in June of that year, the Army sent a photographer named David Conover to the factory to shoot morale-boosting images of women supporting the war effort. He saw Norma Jean on the assembly line. According to Conover's later accounts, he asked her to smile for a few shots. She did. And when he developed the film, he realized something. The camera loved her in a way it didn't love anyone else on that floor. He asked her to model again. She said yes. Within 6 months, Norma Jean had signed with a modeling agency. Within a year, her face was appearing in magazines. Not on the cover yet, but inside. In advertisements for shampoo, for soap, for the kinds of products that made women feel like they could be someone else. She was making more money than she ever had. But she was still Norma Jean, still the girl from the foster homes, still married to a man who didn't understand why she wanted more. So in 1946, she made a choice that would define everything that came after. Act 2. The name change: she divorced her husband. She dyed her hair platinum blonde. and she walked into the offices of 20th Century Fox with a portfolio of modeling shots. The studio signed her to a contract. $75 a week. Standard for contract players. She would take acting classes, voice lessons, dance training. She would appear in small roles, maybe a line or two, while the studio decided if she had what it took. But first, they told her she needed a new name. Norma Jean didn't sound like a star. It sounded like a waitress, like a secretary, like someone forgettable. The studio suggested several options. According to those close to her at the time, she chose Marilyn, after a Broadway actress named Marilyn Miller, and Monroe, her mother's maiden name. Marilyn Monroe. Two soft sounds. Easy to remember, easy to say. It was the second time she had reinvented herself. It wouldn't be the last. For the next 4 years, Marilyn Monroe appeared in small roles. A secretary here, a chorus girl there. She studied acting with a private coach. She watched other actresses on set, how they moved, how they delivered lines, how they commanded a room. But she wasn't breaking through. By 1950, her contract had been dropped twice. Once by Fox, once by Columbia. She was 24 years old and running out of chances. And then, in 1952, something happened that should have ended her career before it ever truly began. Act 3. The scandal. In December 1952, a men's magazine published a nude calendar photograph. The model's face was clearly visible. It was Marilyn Monroe. She had posed for the photos in 1949 when she was broke and behind on rent. The photographer had paid her $50. She had signed a release. She had thought no one would ever see them. Now, millions of people had. In 1952, this was a scandal that could destroy a career. Studios had morality clauses. Actresses were expected to be wholesome, untouchable, pure. The studio executives called her in. They were furious. They wanted her to deny it, to say it wasn't her, to let the lawyers handle it. But Marilyn Monroe did something no one expected. She admitted it. She told reporters, with quiet dignity, that she had needed the money, that she wasn't ashamed, that she had done what she had to do to survive. America, somehow, forgave her. Maybe because her honesty felt rare. Maybe because people understood what it meant to be desperate. Maybe because, by then, they had already started to fall in love with her. Within months, she was cast in Niagara, then Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, then How to Marry a Millionaire. By 1953, she was the biggest box office draw in the country. The girl who had been invisible had become impossible to ignore. That something quieter the world never saw. It was this, the ability to turn her own vulnerability into connection, to make her struggles feel like everyone's struggles. Climax, 9 to 11 o'clock. By the mid-1950s, Marilyn Monroe was everywhere. Her films were breaking records. Her image was on billboards, in magazines, on television. She married a baseball legend, then a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright. She met presidents. She sang for troops overseas. But here's what most people didn't see. She was exhausted. She had spent her entire life performing. First, to survive the foster homes. Then, to survive Hollywood. She had built a persona so powerful that it had eclipsed the person underneath. In private, according to those close to her, she struggled with insomnia, with anxiety, with the pressure of being Marilyn Monroe every time she stepped outside. She once told a reporter, "People had a habit of looking at me as if I were some kind of mirror instead of a person." By the early 1960s, she was fighting with studios over scripts, over control, over the right to be taken seriously as an actress. She wanted to play complex roles. She wanted to be more than the blonde in the tight dress. But Hollywood had decided who Marilyn Monroe was. And Hollywood doesn't let go easily. In August 1962, at the age of 36, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Los Angeles home. The official cause was listed as probable suicide by overdose of barbiturates. The world mourned. 50 years later, they still do. Resolution: 11 to 1300 hours. So how did a girl who grew up invisible become the most famous woman in America? Not because she was lucky, not because someone discovered her, because she decided, over and over again, that she would not disappear. She reinvented herself when the world told her she wasn't enough. She admitted her mistakes when the world told her to lie. She fought for control when the world told her to be grateful. And that something quieter we mentioned at the start, it was resilience. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that shows up every morning and tries again. If you were in your 20s or 30s in the 1950s, Marilyn Monroe was part of your world. You saw her movies on a Friday night. You read about her marriages in the Sunday paper. You watched her transform from a contract player into a global icon. And if you were paying attention, you saw something else too. A woman who refused to stay small, even when staying small would have been easier. That's the real story of Marilyn Monroe. Not the myth, not the tragedy, the quiet, relentless climb. Memory: 13 to 1400 hours. If you grew up watching Marilyn Monroe, you remember where you were when you heard the news in August 1962. Maybe you were listening to the radio in your kitchen. Maybe a neighbor told you over the back fence. You remember the shock, the sadness, the sense that something bright had gone out. But you also remember the films. The way the theater smelled of popcorn when you watched Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. The laughter that filled the room during Some Like It Hot. The way she could light up a screen with nothing but a smile. What do you remember most about Marilyn Monroe? Was it a specific movie? A photograph in a magazine you saved? A moment that stayed with you all these years? Those memories matter, because they're proof that she succeeded. Not just in becoming famous, but in becoming unforgettable. CTA: 14 to 1500 hours. What's your favorite Marilyn Monroe memory? A film that made you laugh? A song that stayed with you? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. If you enjoyed this look back at one of Hollywood's most iconic figures, subscribe to Golden Age Stories. Every week, we bring you the real stories behind the people and moments that shaped your generation. Next time, we'll be looking at another figure who changed America in ways most people never expected. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching. And remember, the best stories are the ones we live through together.